In a packed classroom, a teacher's harsh words cut through the air. "You'll never succeed, Barron." But what happened next left everyone speechless and changed the course of his life forever. It was an overcast morning, and the school hallways buzzed with the usual sounds of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking on polished floors. The air carried the faint scent of marker ink and cafeteria food warming in the distance. Inside room 204, the atmosphere was quieter, but tension simmered just beneath the surface. The classroom was modest but neatly arranged, with rows of desks facing a whiteboard. On the walls hung motivational posters with phrases like "dream big" and "failure is just a stepping stone." But the mood in the room didn't match the uplifting messages. The teacher, Mr. Calloway, a stern man in his late 50s, stood at the front, flipping through a stack of papers. His glasses rested low on his nose and his sharp eyes scanned the room, giving the impression he could see through walls. Seated in the third row was Barron Trump, slightly hunched over his notebook. He was tall for his age, his sharp features and calm demeanor making him stand out. He kept to himself, diligently jotting notes while the other students exchanged whispers and glances. Barron wasn't loud or flashy, he didn't need to be, but his quiet confidence often drew attention, and not always the kind he wanted. The class was silent, waiting for Mr. Calloway to hand back their recent test scores. The teacher's footsteps echoed loudly in the still room as he moved down the aisles, dropping papers onto each desk with a heavy hand. Students peeked at their grades, some sighing in relief, others groaning in frustration. When Mr. Calloway reached Barron's desk, he paused. He held the paper up for a moment, his expression unreadable, before slamming it down. "Another poor performance," he said loudly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Barron, you're wasting your potential. At this rate, you'll never succeed." A few students gasped softly, their eyes darting between Barron and the teacher. Barron's face didn't change. His expression remained calm, almost unreadable. But anyone paying close attention could see the faint tension in his jaw, the way his pen stopped moving. The room grew heavy with awkwardness. Some students looked down at their desks, pretending they hadn't heard. Others exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to speak up. Mr. Calloway turned back to the front of the room, oblivious to the ripple of unease his words had caused. Outside the window, gray clouds hung low, casting a muted light over the school grounds. Inside, Barron sat silently, his mind racing. The sting of Mr. Calloway's words burned, but deep within him, something else sparked. A quiet determination. This moment wouldn't define him. It would push him to prove everyone wrong. Barron sat at his desk, staring at the red D circled at the top of his test paper. The bald mark felt more like a branding iron than a grade, searing into his mind. Mr. Calloway's words still echoed in his head. "You'll never succeed." The room was buzzing again as students moved on from the moment. But Barron remained still, the weight of the comment pressing down on him. It wasn't just the grade or the harsh words that stung. It was the frustration of not being understood. Barron had always been a quiet thinker, someone who took time to process ideas and find his own way. Traditional tests and rigid methods weren't where he thrived, but that didn't mean he wasn't trying. He studied, he worked hard, but the results never seemed to reflect his effort. And now, in front of his peers, his teacher had reduced him to nothing more than a failure. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, Barron quickly stuffed the test into his backpack and walked out. He kept his head down, avoiding the sympathetic looks from a few classmates and the smug smirks from others who seemed to revel in his embarrassment. The hallway felt too loud, too crowded, and he made his way to a quiet bench outside the school, away from the chaos. Sitting there, he pulled out the test paper again. He read through the questions and answers, searching for where he went wrong. But the more he looked, the more he felt his frustration bubbling up. It wasn't just about the test. It was about how often he felt dismissed, like his efforts didn't matter. "What's the point?" he muttered under his breath, crumpling the paper in his hand. For a moment, He felt like giving up. It would be easier to stop trying, to accept that he'd never be good enough in the eyes of people like Mr. Calloway. But deep down he knew he couldn't let this be the end of his story. Barron's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Hey, you okay?" It was Emma, a classmate who often sat a row behind him. She was one of the few who didn't join in the gossip or mockery that often swirled around the school. Her tone was genuine, her eyes filled with concern. Jaron hesitated before answering. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Emma sat down beside him, giving him space but not leaving. "Look, what Mr. Calloway said back there, it was out of line. He doesn't know what you're capable of." Barron sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe he's right. I've been trying, but it's like nothing I do is ever good enough." Emma shook her head. "You can't let one person's opinion define you. You're smart, Barron. You have so much affinity. All of this proves it. This is all part of the puzzle. Just because you don't fit into his mold doesn't mean you're not capable of great things." Her words struck a chord, but Barron wasn't sure how to respond. He wanted to believe her, but the weight of doubt was heavy. "It's not just him," he admitted. "It feels like everyone's waiting for me to fail." Emma looked at him for a moment, then smiled, then proved them wrong. Barron's gaze met hers, and for the first time that day, a spark of determination flickered in his eyes. Proving them wrong wouldn't be easy, but Emma's words planted a seed of resolve. This wasn't just about Mr. Calloway or the test. This was about standing up for himself, about showing that success doesn't look the same for everyone. As Emma stood to leave, she patted Barron on the shoulder. "You've got this," she said before walking back inside. Barron sat there for a while longer, the crumpled test paper still in his hand. He unfolded it, smoothing out the creases. He wasn't sure what his next step would be, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going to let this moment define him. If anything, it would be the fuel he needed to rise above the doubt and prove not just Mr. Calloway, but himself wrong. The next morning, Barron woke up earlier than usual. His mind was buzzing, replaying the events from the previous day. Mr. Calloway's words still stung, but Emma's encouragement echoed louder now. Prove them wrong. As he stared at the ceiling, Barron decided he wasn't going to let anyone write his story for him. He pulled out his notebook and began jotting down ideas. If he couldn't succeed by Mr. Calloway's rigid standards, he'd find another way to show his abilities. His notes started small, ideas for improving his grades, projects he could work on, but soon a bigger idea took shape. What if he created something that reflected his strengths? Something that couldn't be measured by a test score. At school, Barron's determination didn't go unnoticed. During math class, he stayed after to ask the teacher for clarification on concepts he struggled with. Though the teacher was surprised, she was patient and walked him through the problems. Barron felt a small sense of pride as he finally solved an equation that had stumped him for weeks. In history, he raised his hand for the first time in months. When the teacher asked for opinions on a topic, Barron spoke clearly and thoughtfully, surprising his classmates. A few students exchanged glances, clearly not expecting him to contribute. Even the teacher raised an eyebrow before nodding in approval. By lunchtime, word had started to spread. "What's up with Barron?" one student whispered to another. "Did you hear him in class? He's actually trying." Not everyone was impressed. A group of boys snickered as Barron walked past their table. "Look who thinks he's suddenly a genius," one muttered, loud enough for him to hear. Barron felt a flicker of irritation, but didn't stop. He wasn't doing this for them. Instead, he headed to the library, where he spent his free period researching. He'd decided to take on a personal project, something creative and meaningful, a way to channel his energy and prove what he was capable of. His idea was ambitious, but the more he worked on it, the more he felt it was worth pursuing. Over the next few weeks, Barron's focus intensified. He spent late nights in his room sketching designs and drafting plans. He sought help when needed, asking teachers and classmates for advice. Even Emma pitched in, offering feedback and keeping him motivated. Slowly, his project began to take shape. But it wasn't without setbacks. One night, after hours of work, Barron's computer crashed, and he lost a chunk of his progress. Frustrated, he nearly gave up. Maybe Mr. Calloway was right, he muttered, staring at the blank screen. But then he remembered the way Emma had looked at him that day on the bench, the belief in her eyes. He took a deep breath, closed his laptop, and decided to start again the next day. At school, Mr. Calloway hadn't noticed much of a change in Barron. To him, Barron was just another underperforming student. But during a group activity, Barron's teammates were quick to notice his input. "That's actually a good idea," one of them admitted reluctantly. Barron felt a small flicker of pride but didn't let it distract him. He still had a lot to prove. As his project neared completion, the stakes felt higher. He knew he had one chance to make an impact, not just for himself, but to show everyone that success couldn't be defined by a single test or a single person's opinion. Late one evening, as he put the finishing touches on his work, Barron leaned back and smiled. For the first time in weeks, he felt ready. The next day during class, Barron raised his hand to address Mr. Calloway. "Sir," he began, his voice steady, "I'd like to show you something I've been working on." The room fell silent. Mr. Calloway looked up, clearly surprised. "Is it your homework?" he asked dryly. "No," Barron replied. "It's bigger than that." Curious murmurs spread through the room as Barron walked to the front, holding a folder. He placed it on Mr. Calloway's desk and said, "This is what I've been doing to prove that I'm capable of more than you think." Mr. Calloway opened the folder, his expression neutral at first. But as he flipped through the pages, his eyebrows furrowed. Slowly, the look of dismissal faded, replaced by something closer to interest. "What is this?" Mr. Calloway asked, his tone less sharp now. "It's a project I've been working on," Barron said confidently. "It combines ideas from history, math, and design. I wanted to create something that shows I'm not just coasting, I'm thinking." The class watched in stunned silence as Mr. Calloway examined Barron's work. It was clear from his face that he hadn't expected this, and though he didn't say anything immediately, Barron knew the tide was starting to turn. The reactions around the room varied. Some students looked impressed, others skeptical. But one thing was certain: Barron had their attention. For the first time, he felt like he wasn't just another student in the background. He was proving himself in a way that no one could ignore, and this was just the beginning. The room was silent as Mr. Calloway continued flipping through Barron's project. His expression, usually a mix of indifference and sternness, now showed genuine surprise. The folder contained a detailed plan, a unique proposal for a school-wide initiative that combined sustainability, design, and historical research. It wasn't just well thought out, it was innovative. Barron stood at the front of the class, his heart pounding, but his posture steady. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, pouring every ounce of effort and determination into proving that he was more than just a struggling student. Now, the moment of truth had arrived. "This is impressive," Mr. Calloway finally said, his tone uncharacteristically soft. The words hung in the air, shocking not just Barron but the entire class. Whispers broke out among the students, who couldn't believe what they were hearing. But," Mr. Calloway continued, raising a hand, "this level of work doesn't just come out of nowhere. What motivated you to do this?" Barron took a deep breath. He could have played it safe, but something inside him refused to hold back. "Because I was tired of being told I wasn't good enough," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I've struggled in the past, but that doesn't mean I don't have potential. This project was my way of showing you and everyone else that I'm capable of more than you think." The class was silent again, but this time the atmosphere was different. It wasn't awkward or tense. It was heavy with anticipation. Even the students who had doubted Barron the most now watched him with a mix of curiosity and respect. Emma, sitting near the back, smiled proudly. She had been the only one to believe in Barron from the start, and now, watching him stand tall in front of the class, she felt vindicated. Mr. Calloway placed the folder on his desk and looked directly at Barron. "This is excellent work," he admitted, his voice firm but respectful. "You've clearly put a lot of thought and effort into this. I underestimated you, Barron, and for that, I owe you an apology." Barron's eyes widened slightly. An apology from Mr. Calloway? That was something no one in the class had ever expected to hear. But then came the twist. Mr. Calloway cleared his throat and turned to address the class. What Barron has done here is a perfect example of what I've been trying to teach all of you. Success isn't about where you start. It's about where you're willing to go. And today, Barron has shown all of us what that looks like. The students exchanged stunned glances. It was one thing for Mr. Calloway to admit he was wrong, but to use Barron as a positive example? That was unheard of. As the class began to clap, slowly at first, then louder, Barron felt a surge of emotions he couldn't quite describe. Relief, pride, and even a bit of disbelief, all swirled together. He had expected resistance, maybe even criticism, but instead, he was met with validation. But then, Mr. Calloway took it one step further. "Barron," he said, "I'd like you to present this project to the school board. I think they need to see what you've created." Barron's heart nearly stopped. Presenting to the school board? That was something he'd never imagined, let alone prepared for. But as he looked around the room, at Emma's encouraging smile, at the respect in his classmates' eyes, he realized he was ready for the challenge. "Thank you, sir," Barron said, his voice calm but filled with quiet determination. "I'd be honored." In that moment, everything changed. Barron wasn't just a struggling student anymore. He was someone who had faced adversity, worked hard, and risen above it. And in doing so, he had not only proven his worth to Mr. Calloway and his classmates, but most importantly, to himself. As Barron returned to his seat, the applause slowly subsided, but the energy in the room remained electric. For once, all eyes were on him, not out of ridicule or judgment, but with genuine admiration. Even the classmates who had smirked or whispered behind his back now looked at him differently. There was a shift in the air, as if everyone collectively realized they had underestimated him. Emma leaned over, whispering, "I told you you'd prove them wrong." Her smile was wide, and her voice carried a mix of pride and relief. Barron couldn't help but smile back, the weight he had been carrying for weeks starting to lift. As the lesson continued, the usual chatter and distractions in the classroom were absent. The students were unusually focused, perhaps inspired by what they had just witnessed. Mr. Calloway, too, seemed different. Less harsh, more thoughtful in his approach. Barron noticed him glancing at the project folder on his desk more than once, as if he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. When the bell rang, signaling the end of class, students lingered longer than usual, gathering their things slowly. A few approached Barron on their way out. "Hey man, that was really cool," one of the boys who'd often teased him said, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. "I didn't know you had it in you." Barron nodded, his response calm but sincere. "Thanks," another girl chimed in. "That project was amazing. I wish I could come up with something like that." "Maybe you can," Barron replied simply, his tone encouraging. As the room emptied, Mr. Calloway called Barron over. "Can I have a word?" he asked, gesturing to the desk. Barron approached, feeling a mix of nerves and curiosity. "Barron," Mr. Calloway began, "I owe you more than an apology. I've been a teacher for decades, and sometimes I forget that not everyone learns the same way. What you showed me today wasn't just a project, it was a lesson. You've reminded me why I started teaching in the first place." Barron stood silently, absorbing the unexpected words. Mr. Calloway continued, "You've got something special, and I want to help you nurture it. If you're open to it, I'd like to mentor you, not just on your schoolwork, but on how to take ideas like this and make them even bigger." Barron felt his chest tighten with emotion. He nodded slowly. "I'd like that." "Thank you, sir." As Barron left the classroom, he felt lighter, freer. In the hallway, Emma was waiting. "So?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "He wants to mentor me," Barron said, still processing the idea. Emma grinned. "I knew it. This is just the beginning for you." Later that evening, Barron sat in his room, staring at the project folder on his desk. It represented more than just hard work. It was a symbol of resilience, of not letting others define his worth. He thought about the journey to this point, the doubt, the frustration, the quiet moments of determination. Every challenge had brought him here. He picked up his notebook and began jotting down new ideas. This time, the words flowed easily, unhindered by fear or doubt. For the first time in a long while, Barron felt something he hadn't felt before: confidence. Meanwhile, Emma texted him, "You've inspired a lot of people today, including me. Proud of you, Barron." Barron smiled at the screen. He replied simply, "Thanks. Let's see what's next." In that moment, Barron realized this wasn't just about proving Mr. Calloway wrong or impressing his classmates. It was about discovering what he was capable of and knowing that success didn't come from fitting into someone else's expectations. It came from rising above them. Barron's story is a powerful reminder that success isn't defined by how others see us. It's about how we see ourselves. In a world that often values fast results and rigid standards, it's easy to feel like we don't measure up. But what Barron showed us is that true strength comes from perseverance and the courage to rise above doubt, both from others and within ourselves. Mr. Calloway's harsh words could have crushed Barron's spirit. Instead, they became the spark that pushed him to prove his worth, not through rebellion or resentment, but through hard work and determination. His journey wasn't just about proving someone wrong. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of more than he believed. This story also reminds us of the power of belief, how a simple act of encouragement, like Emma's words on the bench, can make all the difference. Sometimes it takes just one person to see our potential for us to start seeing it ourselves. Emma's kindness was the lifeline Barron needed to keep going, and it's a reminder that we all have the power to lift someone up when they need it most. But perhaps the biggest lesson here is that success isn't about fitting into someone else's mold. Barron didn't succeed by acing a test or doing things the normal way. He succeeded by thinking creatively, taking risks, and staying true to his strengths. His story challenges all of us to rethink what success looks like and to recognize that everyone's path is unique. In the end, Barron's journey wasn't just about personal growth. It inspired those around him to reflect on their own actions and beliefs. His classmates saw that people are more than their mistakes. His teacher learned the importance of supporting individuality. And for Barron, this experience became more than just a victory. It became a turning point. No matter where you are in life or what challenges you face, Barron's story shows that you're not defined by your setbacks. You're defined by how you respond to them. So the next time someone doubts you, or even if you doubt yourself, remember this: success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you're capable of more than you ever imagined. If Barron's journey inspired you, imagine how many more lives we can touch by sharing this story. Let's spread this message of resilience and self-belief to as many people as possible. Don't forget to like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, determination, and courage. Together, we can inspire others to overcome their challenges and chase their dreams.